It was in the middle of November when we arrived at Martingale and found the place anything but romantic or pleasant. The walks were wet and sodden, the trees were leafless, and there were no flowers save a few late pink roses blooming in the garden. And it had been a wet season, and the place looked miserable. Claire would not ask Alice down to keep her company in the winter months, as she had intended, and I for myself, chronozons, were still absent in of Norfolk, and they were meant to spend Christmas with old Miss Cronson, now recovered. Altogether, Martingale seemed to be dearly enough, and the ghost stories had us laughing while sunshine flooded the room and became less so unreal. When we had nothing but blazing fires and waxed candles, that despite the gloom, they became more real also when the servant after servant left us to seek situations elsewhere when noises grew frequent in the house. When ourselves, Claire and I, would have our own ears and heard the tramping, banging on the clatter door which had been described to us. Dear reader, you are free suspicious finances. You poo-poo existence of ghosts, and the only wish you could find is the haunted house which is to spend the night, which is all very brave and very praiseworthy, but wait until you're left in a dreary, desolated old country mansion, filled with most of unaccountable sounds, without a servant, none of save an old caretaker and his wife, who living at the extremeness of the end of the building. Heard nothing of that tramp bang bang going on all the hours of the night. At first I imagined the noises were produced by some evil disposed persons who wished for the purpose of their own to keep the house uninhabited. But in digress, Claire and I came to the conclusion of the investigation, and it must be supernatural. The Martingale consequences unattainable, still being practically people, unlike our predecessors, not having any money to live anywhere else, and now we liked. And we decided to watch and see whatever we could trace any inhuman influence in the matter. If not, it was agreed to pull down right there of the wing of the house and the principal staircase. For nights and nights we sat up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Claire engaged in needlework and I with reading, with the revolver lying on the table beside me, but nothing, neither for sound or appearance, rewarded our vigil. This confirmed my ideas that were not supernatural, but to at least test the matter. I determined on Christmas Eve, the anniversary of Mr. Jeremy Lenzer's disappearance, to keep my watch myself and read in the chamber. Even Claire and I never mentioned any attention. About 10, tired out from our previous vigils, we decided to retire to rest. Somewhat obsequiously, perhaps maybe I noisily shut the door of my room and then opened them halfway in a half an hour afterwards. Who mouse could have been pursued that it's a way of the corridor with greater silence and caution than ever. Quite in the dark, I sat in the red room. For over an hour, I might have as well been in the grave, for if anything I could see in the apartment, but all of the end of the moon rose from the strange lights across the floor and on the wall of the haunted chamber. I kept my watch on the opposite of the window. I now changed it to the place into the corner of the near door, where I was shaded from observation by the heavy hangings of the bed, the antique wardrobe I sat on, but there was still no sound of a break of the silence. I was very weary with many nights, watching and tired of my solitary vigil. I just dropped into my last slumber, which I was awakened by hearing the door softly opened. "John," said my sister, almost a whisper. "John, are you there?" "Yes, Claire," I answered. "But what are you doing up at this hour?" "Come downstairs," she replied. "There in the oak prior." I did not need an explanation as to whom she meant, but crept downstairs afterwards, warned by an uplifted hand of necessarily for silence and caution. By the open door of oak parlor, she paused, and we both looked in. There was in the room, left in darkness overnight, with the bright wood fire blazing on the hearth, candles on the chimney piece, and the small table pulled from its accustomed corner, and two men seated beside it, playing at the cribbage, and we could see the fence of a younger player. That must have been a man about 5 and 20 of a man who had lived here and wickedly, who had wasted substance and his health, who had been while in the flesh of Germany Leicester. It would have been difficult for me to say how I knew this, how a moment I identified the features of the player with those who men who have been playing for 41 years every night. He was dressed in a costume of a bygone period. His head and hair was powdered, and his round wrists were ruffles of lace. He looked like who had been having some great party, and sat down after return home to play cards with his inmate friends. On his little finger there was sparkled a ring. In front of his shirt were gleamed valuable diamond. There were diamond buckles in his shoes, and according to the fashion by this time, he wore a knee breeches of silk stockings, which showed off advantageously the shape of a remarkable good leg and ankle. He sat in the opposite door, but never once lifted his eyes to it. His attention seemed to be concentrated on the cards. For a time there was utter silence in the room, broken by the monotonous counting in the game. In the doorway we stood, holding our breath, terrified yet fascinated by the scene which was being acted before us. Ashes were dropped on the hearth of the softly like snow, and we could hear the rustle of the cards as they were being dealt without. Fell upon the table. We listened to the count, 15-2, 15-4, and so forth. But there was no other word spoken by the length of the player, whose face could not see, exclaimed, "I win, and the game is mine." When his opposite took up the cards, assorted them neglectfully, and then in his hand, and then put them close together, and flung the whole pack into the guest's face, exclaiming, "Cheat! Liar! Take that!" There was a bustle of confusion, flinging over the chairs, and a fierce gesticulation, and such a noise of passionate voices mingling, and we could not hear the silence which was uttered. But at once, however, Jeremy Lester strode out of the room in so great hurry that he almost touched us where we stood out of the room, and tramp up the staircase to the Red Room, whence it descended in a few minutes, with a couple of wrappers under his arms. When he re-entered the room he gave, it has seemed to us that the other man had choice of their weapons, and he had flung open the window, after ceremoniously giving a place of a moment our opponent to pass out first. He then walked forward to the night air. Claire and I were following. We went for the garden, down the narrow, winding walk into a smooth piece of turf, sheltered from the north of the plantation from young fruit trees. It was a bright moonlight at this time, and we could distinctly see Jeremy Lester measuring off the ground. "When you see free," he said, the last man, whose back was still towards us. They had drawn us up from the ground, and a lot had fallen against Mr. Lester, and he stood at thus with the moonbeams falling upon him, and his handsomer fellow I could never desire to behold. "One," began the other, "two," before the kinsman and the slightest suspicion of his design, he was upon him, and his wrapper, of course, through Jeremy Lester's chest. At the sight of the cowardly treachery, Claire screamed out loud, and in that moment the combatants had disappeared, and the moon obscured behind the cloud, and we were standing right in front of the shadow of the fruit plantation, shivering with cold and terror, but we knew that at last had to become the late owner of the Martingale, and that he had fallen, not in fair fight, but foully murdered by a false friend. Then we went late on Christmas morning. I awoke. It was to see the white world. Behold the ground, the trees, and the shrubs all around Leyden, and all covered in snow. There was snow everywhere. Such snow that no person could ever remember having fallen for 41 years. It was just a watch on Christmas that this Mr. Jeremy disappeared, remarked the old sexton to my sister, who had insisted on dragging me through the snow to church, whereupon Claire fainted away and was carried to the vestry, where I made a full confession to Vector that all beheld of the previous night. At first that worthy individual rather inclined to treat the matter lightly, but when a fortnight after, the snow melted away, and the fir plantation came to be examined, he confessed that there may not be more things in heaven and earth but as limit of philosophy, and had ever dreamed of. In a little dear space within just the plantation, Jeremy Lester's body was found. We knew it by the ring and the diamond buckles and the sparkling breastpin, and Mr. Cronson, who is his capacity with the Marning Strait, came over to inspect these relics, and they were visibly perturbed by the narrative. Pray, Mr. Lester, did you in your dream see the face of the gentleman? Your Mr. Kinmaster's opponent? No, I answered. He just stood there with his back to us at the same time. There's nothing more, of course. It has to be done in the matter, observed Mr. Cronson. Nothing, I replied. There was the affair that I would be doubtless have been terminated, but that was a few days afterwards, when we were dining at Cronson Park. Claire all of a sudden dropped the glass of water she was carrying to her lips, and exclaiming, "Look, John, there he is!" rose from her seat, and with her face as white as the tablecloth, pointed at the portrait hanging on the wall. I saw him with an instant, and then he turned his head towards the door as Jeremy Lester left, she explained. That he is. Of one of the file of this identification, I would have vigorous recollection. The servants rushed hither and then thither. Miss Cronson dropped off her chair into hystix, and the young ladies gathered around their mamma. Mr. Cronson, trembling like the one argued fit, attempted some kind of explanation, while Claire kept praying to be taken away. Only for it to be taken away. I took her away not merely from the Cronson Park, but from Martingale, before we left their latter place. However, I had an interview with Mr. Cronson, who said the portrait of Claire identified was that his wife's father, the last person who saw Jeremy Lester alive. He is an old man now, Mr. Cronson finished, a man over 80 who has confessed everything to me. You won't bring further sorrow or disgrace upon making this matters to the public. I promised him that I would keep the silence, but the story has gradually oozed out, and the Cronsons left the country. My sister never returned to Martindale. She married and is in London, although I assure her there are no strange noises in my house, and she will not be visiting Bedfordshire, where the little girl she wanted me so long ago, think of it seriously, is now my wife and the mother of my children. And that, my little pretties, was the Strange Christmas Game, a Christmas creepypasta written by Charlotte Riddell. My final thoughts on this story. Okay, before I get to the review, I have to state something. This story, I'm gonna be completely honest, is kinda confusing at times. It's kinda confusing, and I mainly reason why for that is it has somewhat to do with Christmas, but it didn't really go into detail on why it happened on Christmas or something. it kind of got a little bit weird or something. I mean, I don't know, to be honest. Like, that's just, I mean, there was parts of the story that was pretty confusing, to be 100% honest. Like, I mean, when I actually saw this story, I mean, it's a pretty good I like this story, don't get me wrong, but at the same time it's quite confusing. Like, mainly when I say confusing is that there's some stuff that I do have to say was, related to Christmas, but then there was some stuff that was not really related to Christmas in a sense. If you could kind of understand what I'm saying, then yeah, I'm sure you guys are probably understanding what I'm saying. So, okay. On this story, I actually thought this one was a pretty good creepypasta for what this is. I mean, despite it being confusing, I still find the concept of its own self of this story to be, rather good and well made. And I do like how well done it was made, such as, well, the good grammar, the sentence structuring. The sentence structure was pretty good too, I'm not gonna lie. And I mean, I do really like how well made this story really was, and that the story does have a great concept, and I honestly found this story to be an enjoyable story to read. But with all due sincerity, this was just quite confusing at times, especially when it came to certain things. I think it just went from 1 to 100, and it just honestly was quite confusing. So that was kind of why I was a little confused. Well, most likely confused at times. But I mean, it's not a bad story or anything. I'm not saying that this is a bad story. It's a good story. Like, I'm not denying that one bit. But one thing I have to say is that it's confusing, like, at half the time. Like, I remember reading this story like a few times, and it honestly just got confused. Maybe that might be just me, but yeah, I mean, that's just me, but you guys might have your own opinions on that, but you guys might have something else to state on this story. So, I'm gonna definitely be completely honest. This story, I mean, I personally found it to be, quite an interesting concept for what this is. But at the same time, it's quite confusing, like a bit at times. Maybe that might be just me, but you guys might have some different to put it bluntly, different concept or aspects of it. I mean, this story was not bad. I'm gonna be 100% honest. I actually found this story to be, quite enjoyable for what this is. I mean, I do like how this story went out, and it's pretty good, but at the same time, it's kind of confusing. Maybe that might be just me, but you guys might have your own, well, opinion on this story. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't find this story to be bad, and it's not a bad story at all, but I really do think that it was a bit confusing. I mean, I think this is, about this Jeremy person. I mean, we don't really get too much of a backstory behind him. Like, there's not really much of a, well, backstory behind this Jeremy Lester person. I really wish we got a little bit more of a background information about this Jeremy person, because if we did, that would actually help out with the story a lot more. But with all due sincerity, this must be an older story, because I've seen a few people actually narrate this story. So I thought, you know what, I'll give it a shot at narrating this one. But like I'm going to say, this is just simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regards to these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story would have to be what, I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 because it's not a bad curry pasta. It's a pretty good, interesting pasta. The only thing I would have to say is that it's confusing, mainly because of the fact that, it just went from 1 to 100 a little bit too quickly. And I mean, there was parts of the story that was really confusing. I mean, there was like parts of the story that did have somewhat to do with Christmas, but then other times it just didn't really feel like a Christmas creepypasta. That's just me though, but you guys might have something else, like your own opinion on this story. But I mean, if you guys want to state your own opinion on this story in the comments below, feel free to do so. So, anyways, what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better. Feel free to leave me now with your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're brand new here to this channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.